This is Kid,
And this is Drag.
and today we're going to talk about.
All the stuff you think about.
Oh yeah,
All right, and today we're going to talk about some of the different types of video games out there that we all know and love, but we may not know really what it's all about. So we're going to break down some of our favorite categories and some of the biggest categories that are recognized out there. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to miss a couple, and that's fine. We're probably going to upset somebody because we don't really dive into one or another, but we just wanted to kind of give an overview of some of the biggest types of games that are out there today and some of the viability, try to understand how it is in the marketplace of gaming because there's so much out there. So, to start it off, we're going to have Kid break it down with our first main category that we're going to talk about today.
And that will be MMOs, Massive Multiplayer Online. For this, for me, I would have to say Final Fantasy XI was a really big one in my life. I did jump in WoW a little bit. I just couldn't get into it because Final Fantasy XI was my first, and going into another MMO, it just didn't meet my expectations. And then I tried Final Fantasy 15, and it was okay, but ultimately I was resorted back to Final Fantasy 11, spent millions of hours in it. Dragon X made fun of me because he'd want to play other games. I'm like, dude, we got to go do this raid and get all this stuff done and get this awesome loot. And he's like, yeah, you're a jackleg. So
yeah, I classify MMOs right up there with the biggest life-sucking games in the world. They're probably the most intense ones for sure, but every MMO I've gotten involved with, man, it is just hours and hours and hours and hours in, and there's no limit to it, right? I mean, you can just continue on for the rest of eternity playing a game and still be achieving things. So I think I say life sucking and not the bad way. I'm saying, hey, if this is something you really want to throw time into, this is your category. If you really want to put in, 40-hour weekends and all that type of stuff, MMO is right up your alley. I played a couple over time. One of those was a text-based game called O Game that oh my God, I can't even imagine how many late nights and wake up in the middle of the night to go do something and all this stuff that went on over the course of my 10-year career in O Game.
Yeah, that's incredible. I've sunk a lot of time in 11, and it was a hard transition getting off that game. I finally did it, but I still jump on there every now and then when they do a free login.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just to reminisce.
Yeah, you got to love, I mean, for the MMOs, if you really want something to sink away a lot of time and generally pretty competitive because you've got a lot of people playing there, that's a massively multiplayer, right? So you could literally have hundreds of people logged in or just a few at any time.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Absolutely. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about simulations. Starting off, where I was, and this can cross over in a couple of categories, but what really tripped my trigger around simulations is you got to think about, hey, this is a game that you're going to go in there and try to recreate maybe flight, recreate driving, recreate something where you're operating a device or a spaceship or whatever, but you're really supposed to feel like you're in the cockpit driving or you're in the race car seat driving. So it can bridge over into racing games. They're a lot built around the simulation methodology. However, flight has always got me. I always think about things like X-Plane and Microsoft Simulator and things like this because I always like flying with the joysticks. That's what really tripped my trigger around simulations. But man, the simulations have expanded. So you've got Sims 4. I think my daughter sinks, tons of hours into there where you're really simulating an entire city and life. And depending on the download packs you have, you're actually playing a sim game of life, right? So it doesn't have to be restricted to just a vehicle or something like that. However, the idea is you're putting yourself into a simulated environment.
Yeah,
So,
I've jumped in the Sims and done that for a while. That was especially a big game in the early 90s because there wasn't a whole lot out there, especially on computer, that was everybody friendly, if you will. And Ace Combat was a flying game that I sunk a lot of time in PlayStation. And of course, your Gran Turismos. Those were awesome, getting all the licenses and just raging out and throwing controllers through TV. So yeah.
Yeah, those coordinated, that Gran Turismo was really big right around the time Fast and Furious was out. And man, it was that was all the rage at that time.
Yeah, I can't even tell you how much I got pissed off at that game trying to get all the S class licenses and everything.
Yeah, it can sink up some time. How about Sim Cities? Did you ever play those way back in the day?
Yeah, absolutely. I sure did. I can't remember too much about it, but I know I did sink a lot of time into it. What you have to be a mayor or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and build your economy and your city and all this stuff and
and
make all
then
these decisions.
the people would get pissed off at you, and
Hmm.
because they just walking around in a little box.
Yeah, no, no, it's those are definitely pretty cool. Whether it be you're simming the government or whatnot, or you're simming actually riding in a vehicle. Like I said, to me, it was always the flight thing. So I always loved having the joystick and thruster and playing around with that. I think I wanted to be a pilot at one time in my life because of those things.
Yeah. So next, we're gonna dive into adventure. So on this, I love the Telltale games, Resident Evil, Tomb Raider, the Final Fantasies, the Bloodborns. But I would say out of all that in that list, Telltale was an awesome game. It was something new. What you choose would determine the outcome. And then at the end of it, they would throat punch you no matter what direction you went and all that. And I would say the Wolf Among Us was phenomenal. So if you have not played that, that's a game that you and your better half can sit down and play, and they'll definitely criticize you for your terrible decisions and
every
beat you.
every turn.
Yeah. But Wolf Among Us is amazing fairy tale game that is adult driven, if you will.
Mhm. Yeah, so that was one, kind of looking at some of the theme of this conversation today is what happens to these things and where do things take off? And that Telltale, I think, is really cool in principle because I go back to watching the movie Big with Tom Hanks years ago, and he talked about making a storybook that basically adapted the story to whatever your decisions were or answered questions throughout the storybook, and you fast forward to these Telltale games, well, that really brought that methodology to life. I am somewhat disappointed to see them struggling financially and seeing
Oh
that go
yeah.
away. But I got to think that there's a lot of people who want to have like a group party making decisions. I think that would be a fun game. I almost think of it; it could be a replacement for a board game type activity. It definitely seems like something that is more suited to that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. The Resident Evils were from the first one that come out, man. I've been hooked hardcore on those.
Hmm.
The
Yep.
Bloodborns, oh man, that was a game that I first played it. I got in there, was messing around, didn't realize it was going to be a difficult game. Never played any of the Dark Souls or anything like that, and I set it down. Then the next thing you know, I was getting ready to take it back, and then I played it one more time, and it's now by far one of my favorite games.
Hmm.
Good
Those
hack and
usually are
slash.
those usually are the best, the ones that, put a little bit more challenge than you were anticipating at first and, piss you off, and once you break over that get that second wind, then, those, turn out to be pretty awesome. So, I'm gonna flip on over to some real-time strategy, and I think, for me, this was definitely one of the things that really got me into gaming in the first place, thinking about the original Warcraft 2 before World of Warcraft. It was the first game that I can remember that you could dial into another person's modem. Flashback with me here.
Oh
You
yeah.
direct dialed into their modem and played the game against each other. But that was in Warcraft. There's a game very similar to that. It's Age of Empires, which is one of the most famous games of all times.
So good.
It's
So
it,
good.
it it really is, and that strategy based, like, hey, how do you build? What do you do? So on and so forth. It's a really intriguing concept, especially when you put it in a PvP environment that you're fighting against other clans and groups of clans and things like that. It's really cool concept and a lot of fun. So,
Yeah.
kid, do you have any big ones that stood out to you for the RP or the real time strategy?
By far, the Age of Empires. That was the game that definitely throat punched me to realize that I suck at gaming, is
Hmm.
playing people online.
Hmm.
Uh, that was back before high speed was relatively available everywhere. So
Hmm.
dial up worked great on that game. So I
Hmm.
got to dive in there. I've been playing the single player for years. I've
Hmm.
got it down. I know how everything works. I finally get in there, play people online, and they smoke me in a matter of seconds, and it did not make any sense to me.
Yep. I've definitely been there and done that over and over because that game is definitely one of those. If you're playing locally, that was one of those LAN party type games that you could definitely get into. And you're even playing locally or big groups, you would just be shocked because somebody had a whole different methodology than what you thought was right, and you just got your ass handed to you
Every time.
every
uh,
time.
as far as the strategy, though, like you said, the Warcraft was the OG. I remember me and you playing and dialing in, and that was the craziest thing.
Mhm.
And it's a lot like Age of Empires for those that don't know.
Yeah, that was you had to imagine that conversation. I was like, "Dude, tell me what your phone number is. You gotta go plug in your computer, and I'm gonna dial you, and we're gonna be able to play together even though we're living 2 or 3 hours apart at the time." And
Yeah,
that was, like, crazy at that time.
yeah, and hope nobody picks the phone up.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Those days. Well, we're going to jump over into probably our biggest category and up for some debate tonight around the FPS or first person shooters. This is a really big category and it can encompass a lot of different types of games and different segments of the first person shooter. So, Kid, on your first person shooter list, what do you think stands out to you most, or what are you most excited to play, or what type of game in the first person shooter realm?
So I'll tell you what, if I got to thinking about it, and my first person shooter, I guess you could say, was on the PlayStation, was Kingsfield. It was a knight in
Mhm.
armor kind of game. Looking back on it now, the graphics were terrible, controls were terrible, but I would say it was like the first person hack and slash bows and everything that I've played. So that's kind of where it started there. Well, actually, no, that's a lie because it's Doom or
Mhm.
Wolfenstein.
Yeah.
But I don't know why that game just popped in my head. But anyway, I would say Battlefield, Borderlands, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, and Left 4 Dead. Now, out
Mhm.
of those, Borderlands is always going to be my favorite. But as far as getting in there with friends and having a great time is Left 4 Dead. Oh my
Mhm.
God, that game was crazy good fun, getting pissed off. And especially the online aspect of it was real fun when you could play, the zombies.
Mhm. Yep, the four-person team aspect of that where you're in a competitive play. And, looking at first-person shooter, why it's so broad is it's really indicative of, how you're positioned when you're holding you're playing through the game. You're in the first-person view, fighting things or people or whatnot. So when you start breaking these down, if you look today, the number one biggest noisemaker out there are these battle royales. And I was reading something, it made me kinda stop and think of how limited those are in the perspective that they're here and gone so fast that people forget where they came from or whatnot. There's this game launched, everybody loves it for a day, then it's gone away. And more people are trying to get into that because they're so hot when you've got these battle royales out there by the dozens that they'll pop and be, you'll have hundreds of thousands of viewers. And I do have to give mad respect to Fortnite, who came out and really paved the way for those big dollar things and broke the glass ceiling in a lot of ways. But what concerns me about it is I was reading some articles, kind of researching for this episode, talking about Battle Royale in specific, and the comment was, well, while Fortnite has done so well, we have to remember where this all started with PUBG, and they're one of the leading founders of the battle royale mentality. And I went, well, kind of, but H1Z1 was out there in one of the most popular games on the planet before then, before PUBG was even a thing. And there are just, tons of lawsuits around these battle royale things. But when you go back and look at that and you look at the temperature in the span of 3 years, you've had three major titles in H1Z1, which that was the be all end all at the time. And then PUBG was the H1Z1 killer, and then Fortnite became the PUBG killer, and people are constantly looking for what the next Fortnite killer is. And I know there's some talk about the Apex Legends that's been out there, and it had rose to popularity really quick and then kind of fell back. I did a review on a game called Spellbreak, which is kind of more of a fantasy based or battle royale, but overall, I kind of am concerned that, these are such a flavor of the day thing, right? You've got everybody pitching in everybody that's launching a game, they're asked, "Hey, what's your battle royale going to be?" Call of Duty survived as one of the hottest game topics or titles for the past 10 years, and they're asking immediately, "What are you doing with battle royale?" And of course, they put that out. So, kid, what's your thoughts around this battle royale, about this here today, gone tomorrow mentality around these things?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the hit on the nail there. It's here and gone. I mean, another example is like the battlefields. They're so hot and then they fall off and they're like cheap in the bin.
Mhm,
I like the battle royales. I'm not good at them,
mhm,
so as far as them leaving, it's not a big deal to me. But
mhm.
yeah, it's crazy how flared up and fast it's come, and like everybody's jumping on that bandwagon.
Mhm.
It's like, when are y'all going to come up with something new? Come on.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like, and this is, just a personal grudge I have against that is, to be effective at a battle royale, you've got to be really tactically sound. You've got to understand how the games work. However, once you get the rhythm, they kind of carry through each of the individual games, which I think is where Fortnite made it a little more fun, and they kind of broke that glass ceiling, because where it was tactically sound, you also had a different dimension with the building that made it a little more fun. It made it a little more approachable at first. But here's the thing: is the people are watching those and they're all into them, but it's only like a couple months, and then I go back into some of the great titles that we've talked about, and Borderlands. I'll always go back to that thing is standing on its own 2 feet years after it's released the last version. And I think people tend to stay with other types of games much longer than the battle royale type.
Yeah, they fall off way too quick. There's just so many people doing it now that it's kind of underwhelming at this point.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. So I don't know if that's the fad that's going to be here and gone, like when we go to the big hair 80s, if it's going to be, oh, it was all battle royales back in the 2000 teens, and then it just went away. So that's, FPS is a big category. And I do love those. I do love that aspect of being in the driver's seat of, a battle, whether it's in team based. I've always been a little bit more of a fan of like the battlefields where you've got a group of 16 or 8 people in a squad going after a particular goal or whatnot. But really big category. I think, you could pretty much wrap up most of the hot game titles today are going to be called an FPS. So big game title, definitely one not to be ignored. However, there are more out there. Kid, any thoughts on FPS and wrapping that bad boy up?
uh, no, I would have to say like the one I stuck the most to me was Borderlands and Left 4 Dead, just for
Hmm.
funness. But like,
Yeah.
if I'm getting serious with some friends, was the first Modern Warfare Call of Duty.
But I do have to say, getting serious with friends, that Left 4 Dead got to be pretty serious. That I'm pretty sure. I think we used to play with somebody who might have broken a controller and rage quit and ran
Oh
out and
yeah.
left the house and all that stuff. That game's pretty intense when you get down to it. So going on to the wonderful land of sports, there's a lot of sporting games out there, and generally when I talk to somebody and I'm introducing myself for the first time and we're talking about games that we play, it's always one of two things, right? You're either going to play FPS type game or RPG, depending on how you blend those, or you play sports. You've got a lot
Yep.
of people, huge following with PlayStation, Xbox, PC gaming, all that stuff, even though I think it's more towards the console. But you've got the things like NBA 2K, John Madden football. That's one, and two that I can see every time popping up when I've got my kids' grandparents are over. My son will even talk my or his grandfather into coming in and playing a little bit of basketball or football with them. I think it kind of lets the folks live their glory days over again in sports. But I think that is one of the hugest categories out there. Definitely one of the most marketable ones, but not something I've sunk a ton of time into. But I have enjoyed, like I say, the NBA series and going all the way back to like Tecmo Bowl and playing some of those football games and things like that. Kid, how
Yeah.
about you? Do you play any of those much?
I kind of raised the white flag on sports games in the PlayStation era.
Hmm.
I would say before that though, like NBA Jam was my game, boy.
Hmm.
The Tecmo Bowl, like you say, There was even what was it? I think there was a soccer game that I actually liked back then, but I would spend a
Yeah,
lot of time on the baseball games doing the home run derbies.
yeah, we sure can't ignore FIFA. I mean, that is one of the biggest games out there in the world, as it is tied to one of the world sport, football everywhere else, but soccer around these parts. And you're right that that is, man. There are just huge followings around FIFA,
Oh
and
yeah.
in conjunction with that, I think that Rocket League. I know you and I played for a little bit. Is, man, there are some intense leagues in that Rocket League arena as well.
Yeah. And back, I would say a big shout out in the Sega era of Mutant Football League, which they remade the game and it's not too bad. But man, I spent a lot of time in that where you could bribe refs, kill folks,
Hmm.
knock them off the planet, hit mines on the field. It was great.
Hmm. So, kid, how about you tell us a little bit about those RPGs?
So we're going into the RPGs, role playing games. Now I've spent a lot of time on these, and that's why I haven't done a whole lot of sports games. I like starting off with old school. You go back to Secret of Mana, the Final Fantasy games, Xenogears, Chrono Trigger, Diablo, World of Warcraft, Skyrim. I mean, the list is just long and freaking forever on these. I would say Final Fantasy games have been a big part, all the way from one to present. I've pretty much played them all. Xenogears was a pretty awesome mech RPG game if you're into that kind of stuff. And the one that I can go back to at any time and play is Chrono Trigger. That is just a phenomenal game. If you hadn't played it, check it out. It's got frog characters, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big topics or game types that you see out there today. And you think about Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, The Witcher, probably one of the more complex, fun games to play. I've played in recent memory. I enjoy those. Usually, really fortified graphics in those things. And we've announced the Cyberpunk 2077 coming out here at this last E3 coming out next year. I think that's going to be one of the biggest games of the year. I'm sure they're going to be pushing for a game of the year title with that, being glad that they're launching in a different year than Borderlands 3. But I think that's going to be one. They've got some swagger behind that. So a lot of really good game titles in the RPG world. If you enjoy that type of thing, definitely check out some of the titles we talked about today. You will enjoy them as well as we have.
Absolutely.
So, kind of wrapping up our topics, and we might segue off into a couple other minor ones, but looking at the educational games, and I felt this was really important to put out there because I think The Sims is a pretty good educational based game. If you think about if you play it in the manner, or play like a Minecraft or something like that in that manner, there I was very excited to see my kids come home from school and tell me that they're using Minecraft in school to understand physics and basic things that how the world works and how you build and how you have to have this part and this part and this part to build these other things. And then this past year, my gaming group with DEF CON 1 Gaming started playing a game called Eco, and I was just blown away. Really simple graphics. I understand that they're supposed to be upscaling and upfitting those graphics and changing the engine behind that. But initially speaking, like it was a very complex game, but it really taught a lot around how world economics work and how you can set the price on things and supply and demand, and then some of the basic tools of making things work, like you got to have water to have a bathroom, you got to have a bathroom to not mess up your yard. All these
Mhm.
things, all these very complex ideas I think are really cool in the educational world, and what better way to learn than playing a video game? So mad props to those folks making educational type games. Kid, have you played any of those or picked up any that just stood out to you in the past?
So when I
Okay.
think educational, and this is going to sound crazy, and it didn't make sense to me, but back in the day, in the early '90s, when we just now getting computers and stuff in school, like everywhere in there, they always had two games on all of them. One of them was Tetris, and one of them was Minesweep.
Mhm.
And I was like, man, why are they leaving these on this computer? Well, I finally figured out why they left Tetris on there,
Mhm.
because the jacklegs like me that are sitting there playing it and not learning to do the classwork,
Mhm.
it taught me how to I work in a warehouse, so at Tetris, moving the block, stacking it to get the best result, I learned how to stack pallets.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of educational to me. The other game, what was it?
Yeah, I think you're making a really valid point there about video games in general, because I think ultimately when you get down to it, you're solving a lot of problems playing video games. And I don't want to lose the educational value that you can have. Like, don't hate on your kids for going out and doing that stuff. You'll be amazed if you ever walk through the logic with a kid on why they're doing what they're doing in a game, you'll be surprised at all the thought and critical thinking and decision making they're learning in order to do those games.
Yeah, and I went crappie fishing, and this guy's got this new technology that just come out this year, and it was like $4,000 for this unit, where he would it's live view, so you can literally cast your bait out, watch it fall, and then drag it over the brush bed, and then once you know you're in the spot or you're at the end of it, you can stop reeling and watch it drop down and get the crappies pull out. And I'm sitting there with my dad and the guy, and I'm like, and y'all said video games wasn't going to pay off because he was
That's
blown
right.
away how quick I picked up on all that.
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome, because I think we don't need to ignore that part when you're talking about video games. There's a lot of fun, a lot of teamwork, camaraderie, a lot of social skills are learned through these games out there, any of the type that you talk about. So educational to me kind of wraps up a lot of things, because I think ultimately the decision making that goes into playing a video game is pretty awesome. If it's a well constructed game, it's even more awesome. So a lot of these titles we talked about today have gotten our minds going. I hope they're getting your minds going. So, kid, any final thoughts about wrapping up the episode on video game types that we've got out there today?
Man, I would love to hear from you guys to see which ones struck home with you, what you'd like to hear in the future. I think a lot of this, I guess I'm more of a first person shooter MMO as far as all these categories are. Like I said, the Left 4 Dead, Borderlands, the Telltale, that's one y'all got to check out for sure. I hate to see that company in the where they're at with it, because that was such a great game. But yeah, I mean, that's really about it.
Yeah, I think I hope this is enlightening to you guys who are just starting video gaming, or if you have some critical thoughts about our feedback, feel free to share that as well. We are out there easily findable at kidindrag.chat. You can check us out on our webpage. It links to all the major podcast carriers like Apple, Spotify. We have an account with Podbean, so if you don't have one of those, you can listen for free there at no charge. We just love talking about games and all the technology that surrounds it. So please drop us some feedback. If you've got any questions, shoot them out there. We'd be glad to address it on an episode. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our tidbit on the different types of video games.
And that's our episode today, folks. Signing out for now. This is Drag.
And this is Kid. We'll catch you next time.